me personally. We're investment bankers that create the financial capability to get something like this done.
It's a very important part of the
Well,
process.
if you don't have the money, you can't make the truck. And it was an interesting process.
Yeah, it was a nice job getting Youngstown, get that thing working again after everybody got laid off and they closed the plant. And
Yes,
Well,
a lot of people were out of work, weren't they?
Yeah.
Well, as you know, I campaigned a couple years ago, and you could see the pain in the faces and the eyes of the people in that region. And this is going to mean as many as 4,500 new industrial jobs.
that's you, but it expands exponentially outside of it because they're going to put more people to work.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but there's indirect jobs. And when you create a pure manufacturing job, you expect 7 to 11 more jobs to
On top of that, absolutely.
Yeah.
How many GM employ there?
The last amount the group when GM had as many as I think 10,000 plus, but as robotics came in, it was pared back. But the last layoff I think was in the 1,300 to 1,500 range. Lordstown should achieve that. In fact, they may already be there. I'm a transactional guy, so I don't talk to them.
You're not sitting in the plant.
No.
So you, people called you and you called people and said, listen, would you like to invest in this great project we have?
Well, sort of. It's an interesting story if we have time.
Sure, we have certain time.
A guy named Steve Burns, and I'm going to talk about how this relates with what's going on in our country right now, because I think it's important that people realize that people like that are out there and that they're important to this country. The left wing likes to say, oh, these rich, people don't care about anybody. They're just for themselves. But Steve Burns, and he was a pretty wealthy guy because he had run a company in Cincinnati for 12 years called Workhorse, and he lacked at Workhorse exactly what we were able to get, what he was able to get in Youngstown. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to start off by saying that I've never heard an investment banker say that a deal was done by pure luck. But this truly was an act of God. And it just so happened with COVID, with the issues we had in putting everything together, with a long history of looking for capital and being unsuccessful on the part of Workhorse, it was a very difficult process, and I was very worried. And then a thing called the SPAC market occurred. And
that's the special acquisition.
You got it. And the interesting thing about it is, I don't know if you remember your history, but in 1635, tulip bulbs were trading for $750,000 a piece in Holland. And I would liken what's going on in the capital markets right now to that. You have Tesla trading at a multiple of the combined valuation of all the other OEMs. In the cash. Normally, if you're my business, when you value a company, you look at the discounted present value of all the stream of cash flows. They couldn't possibly create that much cash, and it's just there's that much interest in that sector of the market right now. And frankly, at Lordstown, they were able to take advantage of it. And it happened at exactly the right time. And if it was ever divine providence, this was it.
And of course, it was nice that the factory was there.
Well, that was the great thing they had going for them. And let me go back to the beginning. Steve Burns came to us, and we were talking about how he believed he could buy the General Motors plant at a very, very nice price. And I listened to him, and I was unsure whether we wanted to do it. And I've started a firm 31 years ago called Brown Gibbons Lang, and most of what we do is mergers and acquisitions. So we'll find existing companies that want to buy other companies. Usually we're representing the seller, and we do, scores of these every year. 30 to 40 of them. We have a real estate department, and we do a lot of real estate transactions. But raising $650 million for a startup is not what we usually do. And again, it was divine providence, because I had been in Youngstown. I saw how literally pitiful it was. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind. And I convinced my partners to do something that's very risky. We had millions of dollars of time and energy and diverted attention in this when it closed. And when you fail at something like that, that money's gone. You never get, we get compensated at success. So anyway, Steve hired us, and our task was to raise $650 million from private equity. And we set out to do that. And we're getting some traction, getting some potential big investors. Many of these investors ended up in the public offering, so they were interested enough. But when COVID hit, all the big players that we needed just dried up. They said, we're not going to come out and see it. And, we got to wait until we get clearance to even leave our office. So we were really stuck. So we did some preliminary bridge rounds to help Steve complete his engineering. We used actually a friend of Steve's from the Cincinnati effort at Workhorse to kind of coordinate for us, and we called our friends and family and brought in about $25 million, and that kept Steve going. But what I want everybody to understand is Steve Burns is embodiment of why America works. Steve Burns went to Cincinnati Moeller. He's an engineer, one of the smartest men I've ever met, but not somebody you would walk up to and you realize that. He's a visionary.
Would he ever come and chat with us?
Well, I'll get you in touch with him. He's not only that, but he's a good man.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that had half of why I wanted to help him. He's just a heck of a guy. And there are very few people that will literally risk the livelihood of their families to go out and take this kind of risk.
That's right.
Now, Steve Burns is a billionaire now. That transaction made Steve Burns a billionaire. Now, he's a billionaire on paper. But the terrible things they say about billionaires are exactly the opposite of what Steve Burns is.
Market, right? I see the company has a market capitalization of $4.4 billion.
That's correct.
How did you go from 600?
I'm kind of proud of that. Well, what happened is a thing called a special purpose acquisition company all of a sudden became the thing to do. There was a deal called Nikola that was done. Nikola is a truck company that is in Class 8 trucks for freight liners and the long haul, and they were going to create a hydrogen fuel vehicle. And it's interesting because another Irish guy, but I was reading the prospectus, and I look in the prospectus, and the lead banker on it is a guy named Paul Donahue. And Paul and I were friends back in the 90s, and he was just a senior associate or a vice president at the time, and he was now head of all capital markets at Morgan Stanley, which is a huge job, obviously. But Paul, I called Paul and I said, Paul, you did this Nikola deal. How'd you do this? Because this is a company with no revenue, no likelihood of being able to produce a vehicle for 3 years, no plant, and just really kind of an idea, pretty well developed idea, but just an idea. And he goes, Mike, and just what I said to you before. He goes, have you ever heard an investment banker say something happened through pure luck? And I said, never in my career. They're always the master of the universe, and they figured it out. And he said, this happened from pure luck. A SPAC has to invest its cash within 2 years of its formation. They had a limited amount of time, and they put them into Nikola. Nikola, again, without a vehicle, without a plant, without even a prototype, traded in excess of the value of Ford Motor Company in the first day of trading.
I remember that.
Yeah. So when people saw that, they go, boy, Lordstown is actually a real story. So, and this is why it's a real story. Steve was able to negotiate, and I was obviously with him through this, the acquisition of the Lordstown plant, one of the largest industrial plants in the world, for $20 million. And just the equipment in that plant was $2.4 billion worth of net book assets. So you're looking at a plant it's just phenomenal. You walk in and it literally just, you just gasp. It's like a wonder of the world. My wife and I were at a wedding for one of my son's friends in Western Pennsylvania, and we stopped there, and I had a key card to get in. I took my wife, and she just stood there. She couldn't believe it.
It's massive, isn't it?
It's just gigantic.
I don't know how many acres, 100 acres.
Oh, no, 700.
700.
Under roof, I think it's 160 or something like that. But it's 10.5 million square feet of industrial space and 6.4 million square feet under roof. So it is just, well, and by the way, a building doesn't create a vehicle. And that's where Steve came in. He had been able, through the money we helped raise and through his own investment and his own taking of risk, created a prototype that was brilliant.
Just want to ask you quickly, electric vehicles, General Motors has predicted that they will be all electric by 2035.
I think
Do you
they'll
agree
beat
with that?
I think they'll beat that. If
So
you
would
buy,
I-
if you buy,
So I won't be able to buy that Corvette that I always
Well,
wanted,
you might
that
be
big
able to.
V8. Now I can afford to buy it, but I'm too old.
well, you can buy it, and now that'll be faster.
It'll be
Because
electric.
you can make a lot faster car with an electric vehicle.
Yeah, but
But
for
it's one
Jerry,
of the
it'd be
noise
hard to get in and out.
It will be.
What about that sound though?
Yeah, well, they're gonna have to fake that.
Anyway, continue on. Sorry. Electric vehicles though are the wave of the future, would you agree?
Yes, and if you buy a Lordstown Endurance, I have my order in, and you should all get yours in. I think it cost you $100 or something, $400, I forget, but it will save you between $6,000 and $8,000 a year in fuel and maintenance. So, and you're going to buy this for $52,500, and you're going to get a $7,500 tax credit from the federal government, and what we believe is also another $1,500 from the state of Ohio for the charging apparatus. So, you're going to be able to have a truck out the door in the $45,000 range that you literally don't have to pay for because over 6 years you get it all back in savings. It's got a 260 mile range, and it's just a phenomenal vehicle.
Do you
Now,
think
are they going to manufacture the batteries there
No.
also?
They're going to pack the batteries. Their batteries require a pretty sophisticated plant and on its own an investment in the billions. They're going to buy the batteries. I'm not sure where, but there's only four significant battery manufacturers in the world. And we were talking to Samsung and LG and Korean, and they're all Asian companies that make the battery. But Steve, again, with his vision and his genius, was able to develop a method of packing that battery in that vehicle that is incredibly efficient and protect it. This will have a 5-star rating for safety. And one of the big problems with the other manufacturers are they found it impossible to pass the crash tests that NHTSA, the government agency that that tests these things for the consumer. We've already had a passing of all the tests in a computer simulation, which correlates 99%. So I see a path to production in early fall. They will begin production in April. They'll have prototypes that'll go through the testing, and you'll be able to drive an Endurance
Yeah.
to a football game.
That's
this fall.
incredible.
Mike,
Yeah.
how many people will you employ, you think, in September when you launch this?
I don't know the
Now, what do
accurate
you
number,
think-
but I would say probably in the area of 1,500.
And what about full production when it goes, where do you think it could
Well,
go?
Steve's projections were in in the data that I've seen, about 4,500 would be where.
So those are mostly people from around the Youngstown, Warren area. This has
absolutely
to be huge for
it's
this
huge.
area.
It is absolutely the greatest thing that ever happened, at least in this decade to Youngstown.
Man, if you were ever in politics and thinking of running for politics, my goodness,
Well,
wouldn't that give you
Steve
a great
Burns for
boost
president.
around there? Speaking of that, are you giving any thought? Because I heard some rumors around town that you might be thinking of filling in for Rob Portman.
Well, I can't make any commitments here, but we're definitely in the final throes of making a decision. And I think you'll hear something here in the next few days.
So you have been
A definite
approached.
maybe on that one.
A definite maybe.
And you have been
sound a bit
approached.
like a politician,
Oh, yes.
so I know you're not.
Well, I am not, and I am the true outsider. So, and frankly, I think we need more outsiders. So,
Sure do. Let me ask you. You told us about the cost. Oh, I don't want to. I want to go back to politics here for a second. What do you think about term limits in politics?
frankly, I think they're essential. What we've created is a political class, and it's people. In fact, I found this out the last election. I learned a lot the last time I ran. Nobody gave me much of a chance, and I didn't understand I probably didn't have a chance. But when all's said and done, in 6 months of campaigning, I won 38 counties in Ohio, got 35% of the vote, and that was with Donald Trump campaigning against me, and the endorsement of the state and our own county going to my opponent. So,
Wait a minute. Stop there. Wait a minute. I saw you and Trump were down at the Lordstown plant, and I thought he had his arm around you saying.
no. Well, first of all, Donald Trump had a lot more to do than figure out this joker from Ohio that's going to run for the Senate. But that's the political class I'm talking about. He was told by his advisors, and the reason it was done is very simple. They wanted the establishment wanted Mike DeWine to be the governor, and they were going to ram it through one way or another. And a guy named Jim Renacci was running against Mike DeWine, and Jim was a threat. So at the highest levels in the Republican Party, they told Jim they wanted him to run for the Senate and get out of the governor's race. And that's what they did. And I was told to drop. And at the time I was told to drop, I was winning by 7 points according to the Ohio Republican Party polls. And basically they said, well, you won't be by the time we get done. And
Disgusting.
Well,
It is.
and Trump was elected by a landslide in this state, but all 38 counties that I won were Trump counties, and in some cases I had higher margins. So even though Trump made 2.1 million robocalls for my opponent, and somehow they figured out I had to believe in the same things that Donald Trump did. In the end, I lost, but I learned a lot, and I don't see it repeated at this time, and I have a year and a half to campaign.
So 2 days from now, we may hear something.
You just might.
Mike, we're going to take a break because I want to talk to you about that privileged background that you had growing up on the near west side of Cleveland. We're going to talk about that,
Sure.
what it was like when you were a paper boy and all the great things you did. Can we? In the meantime, let's play some music. What is the?
Lazzetti. I started a company going to be 32 years ago in August, and I've kind of stuck with that. But I've done a few things on the side, and we built a pretty good real estate business.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people listening to you now, Mike, saying, "Look, there goes another one of those guys from a privileged background. His father and mother had loads of money and all a silver spoon." Talk to me about your background.
Well,
Where were you born?
I was born on West 77th, and I lived in the top of a double. And I still drive by there once in a while just to kind of relive where I lived, and it always gives me a good feel.
Right?
St. Coleman's, yeah. My mom and dad were married there. I was baptized there, and then we made it big, and we moved to Parma.
And where Cotting Day is.
And my dad, bought a tract home, and it was the American dream for my dad. And we had 4 kids. My mom didn't work. My dad was very traditional. My dad had 2 jobs.
Of course.
And to the day my dad died, he had no idea what I did. None. He thought I won the lottery or something. And I was very fortunate. My mother, I was hanging around with some questionable people in the neighborhood, and she said, "You are going to Ignatius. I'm getting you away from those people." And I went to Ignatius, greatest thing I ever did in my life. I've adopted the Men for Others.
But you were a pretty good student, I heard.
I was a pretty good student. Yeah. Well, and my dad was suspicious of that. It was all these A's, I got through Ignatius, and my interest became almost exclusively sports. So my dad was a coach. My dad was a wrestling coach at John Marshall High School, and it was the culture of our family. It was all about what season is coming up next. I've often regretted I didn't serve any time in the military, but it was never part of my culture. I just didn't even think of it. And but I was also practical. I recognized I was not going to play in the NFL. Did pretty well at Ignatius. And
what did you play at what position?
Well, I started as a quarterback, and that quickly ended after I gained 75 pounds.
No,
Now, the problem was they needed a calendar to time me in the 40 after I gained those 75 pounds. But I got my speed back by the time I was in college. I got a few D1 rides. My dad never forgave me for not taking one at Syracuse. And I signed up at Cornell. And I was going to play there. I wanted to go to Yale because there's a guy named Brian Dowling that was my hero.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I was a freshman quarterback at Ignatius, and I was on track to be a Brian Dowling. Well, there aren't many Brian Dowlings, and I wasn't one of them. But anyway, I was heading off to Cornell, and my friend Jack Corrigan ended up going there. Right before we graduated, I called the coach, and I recognized my parents would be able to see me play maybe 2 or 3 times, because they couldn't have afforded to get to the games. I had a girlfriend in Cleveland. She was pressuring. And I went down just to kind of get out of a day of school to see Kenyon College. And I fell in love with the place. In fact, I had 2 sons that graduated from there.
That's a liberal arts school, isn't it?
Liberal arts. But I will tell you this. I majored in political science, economics. Started as a math major, but with 3 sports, it's pretty tough to do that there. Ended up with political science and economics. And I only had 1 liberal professor in either of those fields of study the entire time I was there, and he taught Marxism.
Do you know who else went there, I think, is Kevin O'Donnell?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He played football at Kenyon.
He was the CEO of Sifco Industries,
Absolutely.
Mayo Person of the Year.
Yes, he was a terrific guy. I love Kevin, and I was on a board with him, food company board, and got to know him pretty well. He's a special guy. He was also
wonderful
acting head of the Peace Corps.
That's right.
He had an incredible resume.
So anyway, you went to Kenyon.
Yes.
And they didn't indoctrinate you.
They
Or
couldn't.
did you indoctrinate them?
Well, you know what? They've been very good to me over the years, and I did pretty well academically and got a scholarship to business school. I wanted to go to law school, couldn't afford it. In fact, and my dad took me to Cleveland Trust and said, "This kid got into a bunch of good law schools. Could he borrow the money for tuition?" He said, "Well, what are your assets?" And I said, "You're looking at it." It was me. And he goes, "Well, we don't lend on people." And so we walked out, and I said, "Dad," my dad said, we'll put the house up. And I said, "No, you won't." And again, divine intervention. Got 2 letters, one from the University of Pittsburgh and one from Case Western Reserve, saying you get a full ride to business school. So I went to business school, and I was very fortunate. I did an internship at McDonald and Company. I walked around and I saw people that made in a week what my dad made in a year. And I said, this was for me. And it wasn't like, I was never I don't think I've ever been materialistic, but when I was in college, my father lost one of his jobs, and it was a crisis in our family because they needed every nickel he made. And my mom called me at school and told me she was crying, and he worked for the city of Cleveland. His second job, he worked for the recreation department. And I came home at Christmas, and I said, "Where's Dad?" And she said, "He's at work." I said, "Well, where is he working?" And he was working in a car wash in Rocky River, Ohio. And I went to that car wash, and I watched my father, who to this day is my hero, wiping down bumpers. And I changed my whole view of the world that day. It was, I hate to think that misfortune could drive you in, is the reason, but it literally convinced me that I had to change the economic plight of our family, and I've been able to do that. And I think I've been about as blessed as anybody could possibly be. I have 5 great kids, and I've attained freedom for myself.
Yeah, but Mike, I'm just looking at some of your bio here, and it says you deliver the Cleveland Press even.
Yes.
The paper.
I had a paper out for the Parma people. It was Zona Lane, Ann Arbor, and Debbie Drive, and Sleepy Hollow. I had 73. At least at one point I had 73.
I bet you ran it as a business too. You probably did.
I did.
You didn't keep all the money.
Well, but back then, you could make enough money to pay your tuition at Ignatius at a paper route.
Really?
When I started at Ignatius, it was $350 tuition, because the priests weren't getting paid anything. Mm-hmm. And as they had less priests, it got more expensive. And I put 2 kids through there, and it's not $350 anymore.
No. And also, you worked odd construction jobs?
Right. Well, I often say this, and when I campaigned, they said, "Well, you're an investment banker. Nobody's going to vote for it." I said, "Well, I'm also a concrete finisher. So why don't we just go with that as a story?" But I did concrete work, and I loved it. And I will tell you that when you wheel 25 yards of concrete in a day up and down hills, you're going to be real tough to block come football season. It really helps your core strength. So it was a great. Again, it was just I was blessed, and it was one of my dad's ex-wrestlers that hired me. So connections, I guess I had some connections. And
with a name like Gibbons in the concrete work.
Well, actually, my grandfather was president of Local 310, and he was a concrete worker too. He worked on road construction, and my dad knew how to finish. And I started as a laborer, but I tried to pick up some of the skills. And if I ever went to the Senate, I could put in a few driveways for them if they wanted me to. So.
Mike, I want to come back more. We'll talk more business and maybe
Sure.
a little bit more politics, if you don't
Absolutely.
mind.
Absolutely.
Can you hang with us?
Sure.
All right. Eddie, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Quinn. Okay, we've got Bridie Talty called in, the Queen of...
But Mike, I wanted to, you're an international businessman. You do business in Ireland. You have a company in Ireland, I believe.
Well, actually, we don't have a partner right now, but our headquarters is in Dublin. We have a partnership of 34 investment banks around the world. Mm-hmm. In fact, I told you I have the opportunity to have 4 dinners a year in Dublin, because when I was chairman, I'm now chairman of the board of the board, but when I was chairman of the organization, I moved the headquarters from Dusseldorf to Dublin.
No,
Largely because I couldn't understand German law. So
A wise man.
So how do you find, do you do actual business in Ireland?
Yeah, we've done a lot of business over the years with Kerry, which is a very large Kerry Gold, which is a large food company.
The butter company.
Well, they're very extensive holdings, and Cement Roadstone Holding we've done business with. They're always in the mix. And in order to sell a business optimally now, you've really got to do an international auction. So oftentimes there'll be Irish companies competing.
Mm-hmm. I know Pat Lennon here in Cleveland. He owns Berardi Coffee Company and North Shore Strapping. Pat does a lot of business with Kerry Gold in their coffee business,
Yes.
Berardi Coffee. They sell mixes and teas and coffee mixes.
Oh, yeah, and they keep acquiring. We sold one business. It was ingredients, or it was a syrup company out of Mansfield, and Yeah, I mean, over the years we sold many, but they're very active, and they're a big company in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, is it 20,000 people there?
Yeah.
And and we mentioned earlier Lordstown. That's another big Irish company.
Yes.
CRS Lordstown.
CRH is
CRH.
huge, yeah.
CRH Lordstown. They
Huge
have about
operation.
15 or 20,000 people employed in this country.
Just in the
Because
US.
it's not all one way. You know, a lot of people complain about a lot of the companies leave here and they go to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, Irish companies have been very successful investing here in America, haven't
Yes,
they?
they have. And the German companies, and think of Siemens, and we've done business with many of these companies, and they often have more employees here in the United States than they do in their own home country.
Mike, what does the state of Ohio need most? Now, I know, I suppose everybody says jobs, but how do you do that?
Well, and let me mention, because you've mentioned Ed Crawford, who was our Irish ambassador, a very good friend, a great man. I mentioned Steve Burns.
Mm-hmm.
You take those two people, and they're responsible for thousands of jobs in Ohio.
And the ripple effect from that.
And yes, they're wealthy, and there's a reason they're wealthy. They took huge risk. Eddie Crawford came here, and his car broke down driving through Cleveland. That's why he's here. He started with nothing. Steve Burns went to Cincinnati Moeller High School. He's a billionaire now. These people take the risk, put themselves out there. They're the prime movers that make our economy work. And to denigrate those people because they're wealthy is just an abomination.
As opposed to a politician.
That's right. And the politicians go with it because it gets them some votes. Our political system is sick. And I think each of the parties, individuals start running for office. Many of the people you're voting for, the only thing they've ever done in their lives is win an election. You tell me how they have the knowledge to help this state economically. They don't. And that was always my pitch when I ran for the Senate the last time. If you have grown up, you spent your entire adult life running for office, you know one thing, how to run for office. And you just kind of bide your time when you're in office, getting ready for the next election.
And you ride on the coattails of the business
That's
person.
right. Exactly. And the business people donate. And I want to change that. Right now we have a head of our party, state party, Jane Timken, who didn't do a particularly good job. We lost three, and I'm a Republican, so we lost 3 seats in the Supreme Court under her watch. And she has now aligned herself with establishment people, and she is going to attempt to ram her way into the Senate seat. And it's all a few people making decisions for us, the people. And we've got to the people have to take the parties back. And I'm an outsider. I'm going to run as an outsider because that's exactly what I am. I've donated to candidates that I think represent my philosophy and ideology, but I really haven't ever been involved in politics other than the last election, and I learned an awful lot about how these decisions are made. And I think if people care about our country, they should put the best person in. I don't care what their background is. Doctor, lawyer, too many lawyers probably. And I'm a law school graduate, but I never practiced law, so I'm never going to claim to be a lawyer. But we need to get people of diverse backgrounds that have knowledge. But I can tell you that Lordstown was in a position, as a lifetime investment banker, knew that we had reduced the execution risk of this transaction to about as low as you get for a startup. We got zero help from the state of Ohio and from the federal government. Zero. Now that we've raised all this money and the company's worth $4 billion, everybody's belling up to the bar and they're all willing to give us money. But it's the Steve Burnses of the world that make jobs. They take the risk. Beyond the fact that Steve Burns is just a hell of a guy, this guy went out there and put his entire family at risk to get this thing done. It was a dream of his.
Could have lost everything.
He could have lost everything. And by the way, we were very close because of COVID and all those things. It just caused an absolute mess. And as I said, it was divine intervention. I'll never take credit for this transaction. We got them ready to go. They used our materials. We set the company up. When we started, there wasn't a word written about the company. We had to create the company and the concept of the company. Steve's been able to hire top-notch people. We have the first 2 heads of production from Tesla living in Lordstown right now and going to produce these vehicles. So this guy has done one heck of a job. He's the hero, not these elected officers in our state. The governor's not a hero. Steve Burns is a hero.
Do you think that Tim Ryan is going to be taking some credit for this?
Well, he already has, and he also helped Zero.
Did he?
The best thing he did was push to the front of the line so he could get his picture taken at Lordstown because he almost knocked me over to do it.
That's Tim, huh?
Tim.
I thought for a while that Tim was going to become kind of the Joe Manchin of the Congress, but
no, he's become woke.
Okay.
And I might want to talk a little bit about woke. Everybody says, "Oh, you got to be woke." Wokeism is built on a thing called critical race theory. It is the most destructive philosophy and ideology yet to arise. It's more dangerous than Marxism. It divides us as identity groups, and they've rejected reason, science, and facts as a Western contrivance that has allowed the whites to remain in power. That's their theory. And if you don't believe me, read about it. That's being introduced to into our grade schools. We've got to do something about it. And Mike DeWine has been asleep at the switch. He appoints 8 people to the state school board. All 8 of those people voted to make critical race theory a resource for the education of our elementary school kids. It's abominable. And we've got to get this country back to where we all believe we're Americans and we're all working in the same direction. And you're not going to do it with the accepted theory that rejects 70% of the country. Because 70% of the country are white people. And they don't even have a voice at the table. Part of the theory is that they aren't even able to debate the issues as if they're standing as white people. That's not a philosophy you build a country on.
Okay.
E pluribus unum.
That's right. That's right.
Great stuff. We're going to talk about the truck a bit and the company itself. Right, it's on the stock market.
Right, it is. It trades.
RIDE, and I must tell you, I bought some.
And I'm a registered broker dealer, so I know I can't make any recommendations, and I'm not about to recommend anything as an individual stock. But I will tell you that there's always risk associated with startups. This company's very important. This company's very important to Ohio, and I don't think you make investments just because it's important to Ohio. But the people they have, and you can review the prospectus. They have a plant unlike any other electric vehicle company other than Tesla, and they just have great people. As I said, the two initial heads of production at Tesla, Rick Schmidt and another individual, are now running production at Lordstown. Rich has been announced; he's the new president. Steve's made great moves. We'll have to see how it comes out, but obviously, I think the people they've assembled are just terrific, and they've got a great leader with vision. And I think we'd like to see Ohio become the center of electric vehicle production, and renew our automotive capabilities that we lost.
You know, Mike, I heard a story recently, and I won't name the person, but he was a very rich man here in Cleveland, and he had an assistant working for him, and his assistant said, he says, Ralph, he says, I want to be as rich as you. And Ralph said to him, he says, Mike, Joe, whatever his name was, he says, you never will be. He said, why is that? Do you think I'm not as smart as you? Oh, he says, you might even be smarter than me. He said, but you won't do what I do. And he said, what is that? He said, I risk every single thing I have.
Yes.
My pension, my house, my every penny to my name. I will risk it on something I believe in.
Yeah.
You will never do that.
Well, that's what Steve Burns did. That's what Eddie Crawford did. As I said, these are the people that make our country great.
Mhm. Really.
And it's not the politicians.
But no, I want to talk about the term limits again. Do you think it's right for somebody to go into Congress or into the Senate and end up with a pension almost as much as their salary? I think if you serve one term or two terms in Congress, you're entitled to a pension. Is that correct?
Well, if I ever get in the position to vote on that, I agree with you 100%. The only motivation they have is to keep running so their pension gets bigger.
Why do they need a pension?
Well, usually by the time they've been in office for a while, they're wealthy. That always bothers me too. I mean, Joe Biden does not have has not made more than $175,000. I don't know what his last salary is. Maybe it was $250 as vice president, but he's worth $9 million.
I thought it was 19 million.
Last I saw it was 9. But Harry Reid, who was the president of the Senate for many years, a Democrat, who talks about the ugly rich people, was worth $300 million. How do they get that wealthy?
Well, just like Romney, he never paid his taxes.
Well, that's always kind of a ridiculous thing. The people the IRS comes after are the people that make the most money. I can guarantee you their returns have been gone through with a fine-tooth comb. Donald Trump had to be audited every year. So you may not like the tax law, then change it. But Donald Trump paid every nickel that was due. These idiots that say that somehow he wasn't paying his taxes, it's a joke. Everybody pays their taxes or they're going to end up in jail. And it's the guys that make a lot of money that reap the most rewards if they can find anything for the IRS, if they can find anything that's amiss. There's nothing amiss in Donald Trump's tax return at all.
Hey, Mike, I got to play another
So
song here.
let me mention term limits.
Oh, yeah, term.
We need them.
Yeah.
We need them.
Well, what would you say, like 4 terms as congressman, which would be 8 years, and 2 terms as senator?
I think that would be perfect. Now the problem is,
No
and everybody will tell you this, that if you don't stay in office, you don't gain power. But if everybody had term limits, they'd actually have to pick the best people to be the leaders. They don't do that now. Now it's you've been in office for 40 years, so you're a leader. That's not good for our country.
And of course, they get the choice jobs in the Senate and the Congress from longevity.
That's right. And by the way, if I win, there's no way I can be in that many terms because I'm going to be pushing up daisies before I get to those years in service.
Yeah. All right, but we're going to ask him now something else. I want to ask him about the Keystone Pipeline, one of my favorite subjects to talk about. I've been on Facebook about it. But I just want to go back to something for a minute. We were talking about the term limits. And most of the people I notice on Facebook today, right, left, Democrat, Republican, they all seem to favor term limits.
I don't blame
think
them.
if it went to a
I don't
vote,
blame
Mike,
them.
I think it would pass.
They'll never let
overwhelming.
it get to a vote, and we probably need a constitutional amendment.
Really?
Yeah, that's the only way.
That's pretty hard to get. Of course, you probably could get it though. What is it, 35
Well,
states?
no, you've got to get 6% of the states, and you probably could do it. I believe you could do
Oh,
it.
I think so too.
Yeah, because it would be voted, for by each one of those states.
Anyway, Michael, I was quite upset when I saw the president cancel the Keystone Pipeline,
Yes.
and I'm hearing that maybe canceling other pipelines too, because America is dotted with pipelines all through this country, every place you go. But those are some critical ones. The Keystone was a huge, I think it was a 24-inch or a 36-inch
Yes.
pipeline. What do you think about this?
Well, I think, the Democrats are great for symbolic moves that have massive unintended consequences, and that's exactly what this is. They claim to stand for the environment. They claim to stand for, preventing global warming to wreck our world. And by canceling the Keystone Pipeline, they're actually increasing the carbon production in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
That oil's going to come through the United States one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Either that or it's going to go offshore to probably somebody that doesn't like the United States very much. We have energy independence right now, and they're doing their best to make sure we don't. Because you start canceling the Canadian oil, it's a big part of what could be used to help us continue that independence. And I'd much rather be buying oil from Canada than I would be from Saudi Arabia
Or Iran.
or Iran.
Or Venezuela.
But pipelines don't create carbon. The trucks that are now going to transport this oil to the United States do create
What
carbon.
about Warren Buffett's train?
Well, you have the risk of derailments. You have the risk of disasters with trains exploding and with flammable oil aboard in their diesel locomotives. So they're producing carbon like crazy, transporting this oil. The oil's going to come to the United States because we live in a free market. All those environmentalists and all those global warming people are driving their cars to wherever they're speaking about stopping creating carbon. Al Gore, who's Mr. Environmental, is flying around in a jet, creating as much carbon as the average city every year, or average small town every year. They're hypocrites. There's no other way to put it.
How about John Kerry?
I'm surprised he's still out there talking. He makes no sense to me. I think, you might not like Donald Trump's personality. I get that. But I want to tell you something. Donald Trump did some great things. The Abraham Accords, if they blow that, just because Donald Trump put it in place, it will be a sad day for the United States. We have a Democrat Party that claimed that Donald Trump was the next Fuhrer, that he was going to be a dictator, that he was authoritarian. And we had a record number of executive orders issued on the first day of the Biden administration, which absolutely are the most anti-democratic things that can happen. Obama was the one that said, I don't like our system here. I've got a pen and a telephone, and that's how I'm going to make things happen. Well, that's what Biden has taken up as his mantra, and he is doing it 10 times.
A lot more.
Obama did. Yeah. Oh, it's out of control. And I'm just waiting for 2022 because I think Americans are intelligent enough to know what's going on.
Do you think there'll be a change in the Congress in 22?
I'm hoping we'll sweep the Congress.
And what about the Senate?
I think
It's up 50-50
I think
now.
anybody that's up that has a good Republican candidate, and I think outsiders are still in vogue. I think that if we can get some outsiders in that aren't worried about getting reelected and start telling the truth, we'll set this country back on track.
What did you think of this? Vice President Harris?
Yes?
When Colbert asked her would the riots continue, and she says, I think I got this right, she says they will continue up to the election and after the election, and I think they should continue.
Oh, I mean...
What do you think of that
I
statement?
think she should be impeached. I mean, if the standards for impeachment are what they are now, I think you have legitimate grounds to impeach Pelosi, Kamala Harris, I guess you're supposed to call her, although she calls herself Kamala. I think one Fox News reporter, I think it was Tucker Carlson, was chastised because he called her Kamala instead of Kamala, and then the next day she was in Cleveland and called herself Kamala. But no, there's it's the riots were just what they were. If you look at the pictures of what happened at the Capitol, and you look at the pictures of what happened to our cities across the country with $2 billion worth of damage, the insurrection wasn't at the Capitol. That was a bunch of clowns that don't represent the values
I
of the
didn't see
Republican
any
Party.
police cars burning. Or the
No,
building
no.
wasn't on fire, was
Right.
it?
No, well,
Oh, the
it was,
courthouse wasn't on fire?
but no, it's they didn't set it on fire the way they set the precinct
There was no
headquarters.
fire at all at the Capitol.
No. I mean, I think they tried, but
Portland.
I have to
bad, though.
believe that the radicals that were involved in that, and some of them call themselves Republicans, maybe, because they have more right-wing beliefs. These aren't people that represent our values. When I saw that, it was a sad day, and I don't think any Republican that is truly a Republican ever could support anything that went on in the Capitol that day. I saw Donald Trump give his speech. I think the entire impeachment effort is a complete joke, and I think he'll be acquitted.
Oh.
And
Mike, there is a $1.9 trillion stimulus supposed to be,
yes.
it's going to pass, it seems. What about the trillion that is sitting there hasn't been used yet? There's almost, it's 900 and some.
I guess they just lost that money, and they're going to find it someday and send it out. But the Democrats have come to office promising people stuff, and 1.9 trillion is a lot of stuff.
It is.
So we're not going to stop it. They're going to do it through reconciliation, and it's going to get rammed through. It'll be good for the economy, I guess. At some point, with our $26 trillion worth of national debt, we're going to pay the piper at some point. I don't know when that's going to be, because most of the countries in the world are laden with debt, just like the United States. But at some point, we have to get people to buy our bonds, and a lot of it is bought by China, although they've cut back considerably over the last 5 or 6 years, actually 10 years. But we're going to be in trouble. We're never going to pay that debt back.
Do you know who the fourth largest holder of Treasury bonds is? You'll be surprised. Ireland.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
See, now, a big finance man like you. I hope it's true, because I read it now. I read it.
That
Check
would
it out,
surprise
though,
me,
Mike.
but that's very possible. People try to diversify their holdings, and I guess if you look at the strongest country in the world economically, one that even has, is still a democracy, other than China, who are you going to invest in? And I wouldn't invest in China.
Mike, I'm going to break away for a minute and play a piece of music, and then I'm going to ask you when we come back, if you were giving advice to some young person today, somebody would say in high school, and if they want to be successful, or say, I don't know if any of us could ever reach the heights that you have in the business world, how do you do it? I mean, just think about what you would tell them.
Well, I know what I would tell them,
Okay.
so I'll be ready.
Hold on. All right, here.
When can I leave? It's not the right attitude. The right attitude is I want to do better than anybody else here. And I want to be there until I've done everything I possibly can to improve that business that day. If you say, well, I don't own the business, so, the guy that does is rich, and you need to do the most you can for your employer every day. And I can tell you, I went through many years. I got out of, I had my internship at McDonald's. I got a job there. A guy named John O'Brien believed in me. He was a St. Ed's grad, though. And brilliant guy.
That was an awful liability right there.
And he gave me my chance, and I have I'm indebted to him greatly. But I wanted to go to law school. I couldn't afford it, and I said, fine, I'm going at night. So it took me 5 years to get through. In the first year of law school, you had to take a full load, 5 courses, and I was working full time, and I would work 20 hours a day, and I try to catch up on the weekends, but usually I didn't. If you want to succeed, you have to outwork the people around you. It's that simple. If you outwork them, and you work intelligently, you will succeed. But it's too late when if you don't do all that groundwork ahead of time. And people still make it at 50 and 60, yes, but it's a progression. You've got to start young and stick to it, and you will succeed. We live in the greatest country in the world. I'm a walking, talking example of the American dream. It still exists for those that want to go out and do the work to take it.
Okay. Now, Mike, one other thing. Before this virus hit upon us, we hold a Mayo Society ball every year. And last year, before the virus, you were picked as the Mayo Person of the Year.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, you were. And we had to...
Congratulations.
We had to keep it quiet, because we had to cancel the ball.
Right.
So I don't know if we're going to be able to have it this year or not, but I remember calling you up, and you said to me, you graciously said, well, if we can't do it, I said, will you accept it next year, meaning this year? Are we still on board with you?
Yeah, you're still on board.
Oh, okay. And we're hoping we can do it this year. If we can't, it'll have to be next
We'll
year.
roll it
But we're
over
going-
another year.
Yeah, well, that's good.
I'm not, I always feel, in a funny position at these
I know
award
you told me
things.
you hated awards. You don't like, you don't get, but we kind of use you too, you know.
Well, you'll be able to spring a break donation.
We have kind of selfish motives too, you know. The Mayo Society is known for, our Cleveland Mayo Society is known for that.
Well, we can
But you
raise a
are
few
in very
bucks.
good company with Eddie Crawford.
Oh, yes.
And your friend Kevin O'Donnell and Jack Cale. Most of them you know.
Boland.
Yes,
Boland.
yes.
But Jim Boland,
Jim
of course.
Boland, Chris
You know, I
Connors.
think you know all of them. So I gave you the newest newsletter. They have all their pictures are in it.
Yes.
So hopefully, when the next one comes out next year, your picture will be the most recent one.
Hopefully I'll take a
So-
better picture than I
So anyway, thank you, Mike, for coming in
Thanks for
today.
having me, Jerry.
And we're looking for the big news this week. We'll all be watching
Great.
Plain Dealer or whatever, Cleveland.com or whatever it comes out on. I don't think there's much of a Plain Dealer anymore. I don't think.
Well, I get it. It's become woke.
It sure has. So we're going to close out because we are coming up to the end of editions. They're all pure lefties.
Really?
Oh, Jerry, you.
And I said, so what's your politics? He goes, I'm a communist. And I said, and then he proceeded to point out every immigrant walking along the streets and said, that guy's living off of me right now.
Oh.
And the whole way to my destination, and he called himself a communist. I guess it's cool to be a communist.
Yeah.
But he was like a right-wing Republican.
Right, right. Oh my
Well,
God.
they're changing the whole nature of Ireland is getting. I mean,